Welcome to Get a Grip, the voice of the silent majority. Thank you for watching. We invite you to like, share and subscribe, and most of all comment. We want to hear your opinions and thoughts. Follow us on Twitter and use the hashtag #GetAGrip. We're very active on Twitter and it's always fun mining the lefty salt in the Twitter sphere. If you like the channel and would like to support us, the best way is via our GoFundMe page or via our merchandise. They're both linked in the description. So, what are we going to talk about today? Okay, so I'm going to be kind of blunt on this one. If any of you guys have been following me on Twitter, you'll see I'm quite active on there, and I am not buying this mainstream media narrative around the attacks in Reading, and I am absolutely not buying into the amended narrative that says that this attack, or indeed the victims of this attack, had anything to do with the Black Lives Matter illegal protest that took part on the day. And I'm going to run you through why I feel that way. And, you can make up your own mind. Tell me I'm crazy if you want, but this is what I'm seeing. So let's take a look at it. So before we do dive into this, I'd just like to send my condolences to the friends and family of the three victims, James Furlong, David Walls and Joe Ritchie Bennett. May you rest in peace. Okay, so what I want to talk about first is the media narrative and what I see as extreme bias and almost, I would say, go as far as to say a cover-up, a whitewash of this incident, okay? So if you were following it on the night like I was, the first thing that came up was that this was an attack, and it was reported as an attack just after the Black Lives Matter protest, okay? Now, I believe, and I could be wrong, but, please tell me in the comments if you think I am. Now, that link to Black Lives Matter and the protest was in place for quite a while. And the reason that was in place, and I believe the reason it was in place, was because the press wanted to link it to a far-right extremist, a fascist, as they label anyone that goes against the far left. And they wanted the headline that, far-right activist attacks Black Lives Matter protesters. And that's what they looked for. Now, the next thing was it changed. As soon as the press realised the attacker was not white and was not far right, the distancing began. It was no longer an incident that occurred after a Black Lives Matter protest. In fact, it had absolutely nothing to do with the Black Lives Matter protest because, according to a lot of people on Twitter, everyone that attended that protest had gone home. They'd all gone home exactly on time. Okay, so then it was classed as a terrorist attack and the distancing from Black Lives Matter continued. Then the link came up that the perpetrator, the attacker, was probably suffering from mental health disorders. And if you look on the media today, you'll see all the press kind of almost defending this guy, and it makes me sick, to be honest. Then the narrative changed. I'd gone to bed at that time. By the time I got up in the morning, this was being reported as a murder, and it was definitely not a terrorist attack. And again, the distancing, Black Lives Matter had not even been mentioned at this point. In fact, they'd stopped mentioning them as soon as that narrative of a far-right attack had been disproved. Within a couple of hours on that Sunday morning, we were back to a terrorist attack. So, I'm going to give you a few reasons why I don't really believe that is the case. So let's quickly have a jump into Twitter, and you'll see here, there is no indication that this incident is linked to the Black Lives Matter protest that took place in Reading today. And, I got involved in this tweet. I said, so the fact that the attacker headed to the site of a mass gathering protest to carry out the attack has nothing to do with the Black Lives Matter protest. Think, man, think. I get a reply, he didn't attack people involved in the protest, and it was hours after the protest had finished. Okay, so if the attacker was white, this is me, if the attacker was white and British, the headlines would read, racist attack on Black Lives Matter protest. Tell me I'm wrong. And I just go on there. So if he just headed there just on the off chance, did he? Because he knew that everyone would have gone home. And I'll give you another example of the Twitter sphere. in just a second. But you can see I'm immediately screaming cover up, and you know, how can Black Lives Matter distance themselves from this attack? And we'll see that some news outlets are actually sort of starting to tell the truth today. So I posted a few tweets basically saying what I thought, that if the attacker was white, it would have been directly linked to the Black Lives Matter protest. You know, but as the attacker was from the BAME community, that didn't fit the narrative, so that soon disappeared. We got a problem, came in and basically made a very valid point about, you know, the attacker used the protest to, you know, cause the maximum carnage. A couple of other people joined in, and then we get Danny B. Because you knobhead, it has nothing to do with the protest, dickhead, but would have had if it was a right-winger. Are you a right-winger racist? Unfortunately, Danny, no, I'm not actually. I'm just someone who likes to ask questions. So, you know, my response to that is the media associated the incident with the protests until the idea of the attacker was known, which is true. Tell me that, you know, if the attacker was white, it would still have nothing to do with the protest. I think we all know that if that attacker was white, it would have been all over the press. It would still be there today. There'd be 50 headlines a day, but suddenly it starts to disappear, doesn't it? So as you can see, I'm not prepared to just accept that these murders had nothing to do with the Black Lives Matter protests. I've been through the Black Lives Matter GoFundMe and their website, and, you know, they do promote inclusion for LGBTQ plus and Muslim. And I think, you know, once we now start to establish what's actually happened, we can now just have a look at what we actually know right now. Okay, so after quite a lot of searching today, actually, because if you go to the BBC or Sky or The Guardian or many of the mainstream media channels, you won't find anything other than, you know, these three guys just so happen to be in Reading. You know, they frequent the local pub and they work in the area. But if you go to Pink News, you'll find out a bit more honesty and reporting. And I'll leave a link to this article in the description, and I also want to leave a link to an article I found on the Spectator as well, because both of those are definitely giving us a bit more information. So the police investigation is ongoing, and a suspect, Kari Sadalaha, remains in custody after eyewitnesses allegedly saw him muttering unintelligible words, interesting, before launching a frenzied attack on a group of people. Everyone was just having fun, and then suddenly a man shouted. We don't know what he shouted. Lawrence Wart, who was sitting nearby, told the BBC. Many were in the park, having spent the afternoon attending a peaceful Black Lives Matter protest earlier on. That is the issue that I'm trying to highlight here, how the mainstream media have squashed this element of the story, of the truth, and the reason is because they don't want Black Lives Matter to be drawn into this, and I think it's absolutely disgraceful. So let's have a quick look now at the article in the Spectator, and this basically echoes everything I've been saying on Twitter since the moment this happened. Imagine if on Sunday evening a white neo-Nazi had stabbed 3 men to death. Imagine furthermore if in the wake of the killings it had turned out that all 3 of the victims were gay or members of the LGBT community. To use the lexicon of the time, and then imagine if 2 days later nobody in the UK or anywhere else was very interested in any of this. So what if the victims were all gay? Why bother sifting through the motives? What are you trying to say, bigot? So as you can see, certain people's blindness to defend the Black Lives Matter organisation renders them unable to answer or ask, the difficult questions of reality. So I'm going to wrap this up with, 2 sort of sections really. So what do we know? The 3 victims and the other 3 members of the public that were injured were in the park the 3 victims that have died were in the park, and they did attend the Black Lives Matter protest. Interestingly, again, we haven't heard anything from the survivors. So, what do we need to know? What are we not being told? Why have the mainstream media basically pulled back from the story? Oh, it's a terrorist attack. Everyone just backs off. Oh, that's okay. The public will accept that. Why do some people not even know the full scope of the attack and that there was an illegal Black Lives Matter protest that day? I had a conversation with a friend of mine yesterday. He's recently come back to this country from Canada. He had no idea because all he'd seen was the mainstream media and he hadn't watched it unfold live, if you like. So here's a few things that I'm kind of interested in, and these are the questions, okay? When it comes to the victims, who are all of the victims? Where do they live? Why were they in the park? Had they attended the Black Lives Matter protest? What about the attacker? What is this link to a terrorist organisation? And I don't just mean, he visited an ISIS website 2 years ago. I mean, that story is unfolding. What were his movements on the day? And the painful question is, did he attend the Black Lives Matter protests? Because he fits the demographic that, they promote their organisation too. And I think we really need to ask some questions because there's quite a lot of anti-white rhetoric going around at the moment. We are seeing it. We are seeing increased violence towards white people just for the fact that they're white. I call that racism. I'm just going to say it. It's racism. I think with this incident, there are so many more questions that need to be asked, but I'm sorry to say that I don't think we're going to get the answers because I feel that this story has now been deemed to be not in the public interest and it will be squashed, and I doubt you'll even hear about it tomorrow, the day after. I've already had a quick look on my YouTube feed. There's one video coming up on my recommended, and that's a relative of one of the victims. The mainstream media, they don't want you to ask any more questions on this. And I don't think the government do either, because I think they're worried at the outrage of the silent majority in this country. Until the next one.